This is Jack Zenger. Joe Folkman and I want to welcome you to this webinar that addresses the question, what kind of feedback do those in Gen Y really want, and how do we go about giving it to them? First of all, let's begin with some definition of terms. Gen Y, or sometimes the group called millennials, were born from roughly 1982 to the year 2000. So that means they're up to about 32 years of age. Gen X, the next generation, was born from 1966 to 81. And then you can see the baby boomers who were born obviously at a later time, and the traditionalists born from 1930 to 1945.
And Jack, what are we?
I'm a traditionalist. You're a baby boomer.
I don't know.
So those are the terms that we'll be using throughout this webinar. Now, there are lots of opinions about Gen Y. First of all, there's about 70 million Gen Y workers who are embarking on their careers. They constitute about 8% of the workforce now, but by the year 2025, they'll be probably 75% of the workforce. A man named Bruce Tulgan said Generation Y are both high performance and high maintenance. And so that's one of the things that we are going to be talking about is to what degree are they different in the kind of maintenance that they require. More opinions about Gen Y would say that they've been sheltered from failure. So Marcus Buckingham says they've been sheltered from failure and criticism, which gives them an unrealistic sense of what it takes to succeed in an organization. And he says they're known as the trophy generation because they receive trophies just for participating, and they expect a promotion just for being on time to work.
You know, Jack, I'm doing some work right now with an organization with an older leadership population, and we have a little case study where we talk about the younger generation. And I see every time we talk about it, the Gen Y eye roll. It's like, oh, yeah, there. But it's a regular part of the workshop.
The Wall Street Journal recently reported that two organizations, Land's End and Bank of America, had hired praise teams to keep up with Gen Y's demand for constant positive reinforcement and praise. So there are lots of opinions about this generation, and while it's obviously impossible to generalize in a way that describes every member, there probably are some characteristics which we need to kind of be attentive to and understand. Particularly today, we're talking about their attitudes regarding receiving, reinforcing, and corrective feedback. And by reinforcing, we mean praise, those messages that sort of give them compliments and reinforce what they're kind of currently doing. And corrective feedback, that kind of feedback which is saying, well, maybe you could do it a little bit differently, or there's some things you didn't quite do, or there's some things you did that weren't maybe the best and didn't contribute the most. So it's their attitudes about those two kinds of feedback that we're going to be talking.
And, you know, Jack, I've heard often commentators talk about, well, all that younger generation wants is praise. They just need praise, 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 praise.
Yeah, that certainly is the stereotype, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is.
And we're going to be talking, obviously, a lot about that. So we do have some data on this subject, and the data comes from some 3,715 respondents to a blog that we published with Harvard Business Review. And in that blog, we sort of invited people to reply to a little questionnaire about their preferences regarding feedback. And you can see here on the chart that we had a 56% female, 44% male, and then it's broken down by the different parts of the world from which those responses came. And we've also shown you the breakdown of what generation the respondents came from. And as you will see, nearly a third came from the group we're talking about, Gen Y. More than a half came from Gen X, and the rest came from the boomers and the traditionalists. So these were readers of the Harvard Business Review blogs, and that gives you some kind of sense about this body of information that we have.
What is great about the data set is that almost half of the sample was outside the U.S. So it's a pretty global data set that we're looking at there.
Right. So Joe's going to talk with you about a poll that would like to have you respond to.
So first poll, and you're going to see on the right side of your screen a little opportunity for you to respond. In performance discussions, what would you prefer your manager to do? So A, tell me what I want to hear, not what I need to hear. Or would you rather your manager be straightforward and honest about what you need to hear? So if you'd please put your response in, which would you rather have, A or B? And I can see what do you think, Jack? What are we going to get?
Probably 2% are saying that they like A, and 98% say B.
Boy, it's really there's always that obstinate person that might say, but
yeah.
Or
maybe honest person.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Well, I've talked to audiences all over and asked them this question, and I rarely, if ever, see a hand go up and people say, no, I just want them to tell me what I want to hear. People want straightforward and honest feedback. And so in our survey, we asked people these questions, and turns out the majority of Gen Y say they'd rather receive helpful corrective feedback than praise. Now, here's what we did. We'd ask a question, and the question would be something like, if I had my choice, I would rather receive, and we give them two options, praise and recognition for a job well done or some helpful corrective feedback. And you can see here the dark blue is Gen Y, and then the lighter blue are the older generation, so anything above that. And what you see is actually Gen Y, 66% said they'd rather receive helpful corrective feedback. 58%, again, the others were in that same category, but there's really a preference for that corrective feedback rather than praise and recognition. That surprised you when you saw that?
It surprised me when I saw that. Yeah.
We looked at that by different geographies, and as you look across different geographies, North America, Europe, Latin America, and Asia, you can see that, again, the tendency is strong in every culture and every part. It's stronger in the Middle East, obviously, is the strongest on the.
But it is remarkable to see the consistency around the world.
Yeah.
Of this preferring to have corrective, helpful feedback.
Well, and then we looked across it by genders, and you can see here that males want it, don't they? Well, a little bit more than females, but again, the strong tendency is give me that helpful corrective feedback. And then we also looked at another question. We asked people, my performance would improve more if my manager A gave me more corrective feedback about what I could do better, or B gave me more positive feedback. Wow, 80% of Gen Y say they want, again, the corrective feedback. And again, we even put it in that sort of negative tone of saying, no, give me the corrective feedback. Only 20% said
kind of goes
positive.
From 4 to 1 to 3 to 1. Yeah, right.
We also asked Gen Y preferred clear, specific feedback rather than praise and recognition. Again, the question was, what I appreciate most from my manager is clear, specific critiques of what I could do better, or give me abundance of praise and recognition. Again, 73% of Gen Y versus 27%.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The research that I've been seeing recently on this topic would say that many times people, when they receive just praise from their manager, feel like the manager is being insincere, that he or she is just engaging in flattery, that they're just trying to ingratiate themselves, and they get pretty tired of it. They don't want to only hear kind of pleasant, nice things about what they've been doing.
Well, we wondered how they react to this negative feedback. So we said, how would you react to getting negative feedback? And we asked the question, my coworkers would say that I'm open to corrective feedback or I'm resistant to it. 90% say they're open, and only 10% say they're not. And finally, we ask if you're gracious in accepting negative feedback. And so, and in this case, we said people that I work with me would say that my reaction to corrective feedback is usually I resist negative feedback, making it more difficult to discuss ways to improve, or I'm open and graciously receive negative feedback. And again, we get 89%. So this is interesting. Sounds like Gen Y, they want the facts. They want to hear it. They want it straight out of the horse's mouth, right?
Yep.
Well, I did the research, and so I sat down with a Gen Y person, given I had all this data, and I unloaded on him. Gosh, I was really surprised what I heard. They were not all that excited to hear that corrective feedback. You may have had that experience too, Jack, where you've given someone some corrective feedback that was younger. It was like I just had given them the worst news in the world, and I was just trying to help them out, giving them that corrective feedback. What do you think their reaction was? Gratitude for candor or shock and awe? Well, it was shock and awe. And so it's interesting, sometimes what people ask for, and we got actually some reactions to this on our blog after we published some initial reactions that people wanted negative feedback more than positive. They don't always act like they want negative feedback, do they? And so, again, when you sit down and give them what they want, they don't seem to appreciate it. I was with a fellow recently in Amsterdam, and I asked him about this. And I said, so help me understand this. And his answer was, I'm curious, but I'm insecure. And I think that's true. This is one of the this person graduated at the top of his class, a great university. He was a high potential. He knew he was high potential. He had tons of job offers. He knows he's got great potential, but he is so insecure. And so the question is, and here's another poll. Jack, do you want to do this poll?
Yeah. The poll asks, would you like to know if there was something that you were doing that would have a negative impact on your career and your future success? And A is yes, B is no. This is personal to you. Would you like to know that? And please weigh in, and obviously virtually everybody says, yes, I would like to know.
Isn't that strange?
Isn't that strange?
We do want to know, don't we?
We do want to know. And so then what is the message to that is that it's very helpful to be told there's a problem. And, the question is, if you were living in Oklahoma and you knew there was a tornado approaching, wouldn't you want to know about it? And the longer lead time that you had, wouldn't you appreciate that? And the fact of the matter is, absolutely. And yet, having said all that, corrective feedback is very often quite difficult to receive. What makes it difficult to receive? Lots of factors.
It really is. And one of the things we measured in our assessment was confidence. And some brilliant man came up with that. Who came up with that, Jack?
Yeah, right.
That was Jack's idea. He says, let's measure feedback and your willingness to do that, but let's measure the extent to which you're confident. And what we're showing you is this graph here. And what we're looking at is confidence and then comfort with receiving feedback. And what you see is this wonderful chart that shows you the more confident you are, the more comfortable you are with receiving feedback. This isn't that big shock to anyone, is it?
No, it isn't a big revelation.
So the lower your confidence, the less you were very insecure about feeding feedback. But what's amazing about it, when you have low confidence, you're curious. It's sort of like, I want to know, but I don't want to know. And you're in this funny situation. We actually did another thing where we looked at comfort with receiving feedback and age and confidence in age. And what you see is that over time, both the comfort and the confidence goes up as you get older. And that's logical. I mean, we can see that it goes from the 40th to about the 60th percentile. As people get older, they become more confident and they're more comfortable with receiving feedback. It was fascinating to look at the difference between males and females on this.
It is, yes.
And what you see here is females much less confident at a lower age. Boy, look at what happens when they're 61 and over.
Well, that's what happens when they're 45 or so. It begins to cross over. They become even more confident than their male counterparts.
And there's an interesting thing that happens when they hit that 40s, where the females become more confident. And you can see, it's interesting that males at young ages, 25, they're like, oh, I'm really confident. And then it comes down and it goes back up. It's sort of an interesting thing that happens between under 25 and over, and then it comes back up. Now, I also want you to show you another chart here that shows comfort with feedback and age, and males versus females. And again, what you see here is females start off with a lot lower comfort with receiving feedback, this anxiety. Look at that 25 and under. They're at the 35th percentile. Now, again, you see that change at 40. But notice males in terms of comfort with feedback. The gap was a lot stronger with confidence. The gap is smaller here with males and females, but it is lower with females.
Right.
So as we get older, our confidence comes up and our comfort with feedback goes up.
Right. Okay, so the problem that we're addressing is this. It seems that the Gen Y, the millennials, are very curious and want to know if there's a tornado approaching. But their confidence tends to be lower, and their ability to accept this corrective feedback is low. And for me, the fundamental question that we're kind of addressing is this a phenomenon that's unique to Gen Y and the millennials, or is it simply a function of age? And by that I mean, would every group at this same age be experiencing the same phenomenon? And I will tell you that my conviction is it would be. That it's much more of a function of their age than it is anything that's unique to this particular generation.
I guess as we all think back when we were young on that first job and we're walking around going, oh my gosh, am I in line to be CEO or fired? I'm not quite sure.
Exactly. And I think we were all insecure in that first job. We needed reinforcement. And so those who would paint the picture that this is a unique characteristic of this generation, it seems to me are losing sight of the fact that it's much more age-related than it is anything that's particularly unique to this Gen Y group of the workforce. Now, what can be done? What can managers do that would increase the confidence of those in the Gen Y group? And you see on the chart here, there's several things that can happen. The first is, if my manager listens to what, my point of view about the problems, about the issues, about the topics that he or she's giving me feedback on, it's clear that the best managers are ones who do that to a much greater degree than the less effective managers. Secondly, if the manager gives me this kind of feedback on a more regular basis, it's not sort of a shock. It doesn't come out of the blue, but when we meet together once a month or once a quarter and we have discussions about my performance, if it's just a routine kind of matter-of-fact discussion about my performance on the job, it's clearly much more comfortable and effective, and the best managers do that. Now, it's also true that there's a nice ratio between positive, or what we call positive or reinforcing feedback, and the more corrective or redirecting feedback. And note here that the managers who are the best managers are more prone to give more positive than negative feedback.
So even though people say I don't need it,
they say they don't need it.
When managers give it, it increases confidence.
It increases confidence.
Isn't that interesting?
And I think we're going to try to make the point through this webinar that the great value of that is that those discussions are what tend to build the strong relationship between the supervisor or the manager and the subordinate, which makes it then possible for him or her to give the corrective, more difficult kind of feedback at a later time.
And Jack, I looked at this same chart here by the extent to which you gave more negative feedback, and it didn't help increase confidence. It didn't do anything. It actually decreased confidence to give more corrective feedback.
Right.
So these are the confidence increasers.
And the comfort with receiving feedback has some very interesting things as well. So notice that people's comfort with receiving that feedback, again, is driven by the manager's willingness to listen to their point of view before giving them this kind of corrective feedback, and the fact that the manager does it on a regular basis, and that the manager has a much more positive kind of ratio of the praise, reinforcement, and versus corrective, what you didn't do, what you could have done differently, what you should start doing, kind of feedback.
And again, all these charts that, Jack, you've just shown us, they're only Gen Y here.
Right.
And so this shows you what you could do as a leader to really increase confidence and increase comfort for those in Gen Y.
So this contradiction that we kind of have to resolve is this contradiction that says there's some things that effective leaders do, and we've listed them. You've seen them on the previous charts around listening, being regular in doing it, and having a ratio of more reinforcing to corrective feedback. And then secondly, the contradiction comes in subordinates say they want more corrective feedback than they want praise and reinforcing feedback. But yet, the contradiction is that the managers who give more positive feedback are the ones that are having the greatest success. So how do you resolve that what would appear to be kind of a strange contradiction?
Interesting.
And one way we think to resolve that is that what we've called the positive feedback, praise, reinforcement, and assurance, becomes less needed or becomes less useful as your career progresses. And it can be perceived, as we said earlier, can be seen as ingratiating and not having much substance. Done well with specifics and being very clear about what the outcomes were of this behavior, it has great value. It's especially helpful to someone early in their career because it really builds the relationship with a manager. So positive feedback does have some really valuable qualities to it that can't be underestimated, especially for somebody early in their career. And the second kind of way to reconcile this contradiction is that when it comes to then the corrective feedback, subordinates recognize that this usually has more long-term benefits and has potentially much higher impact. The key seems to be how it's delivered and the kind of relationship that exists with the giver of that feedback. And so subordinates say they want it because it has so much more potential benefit, but it's after the earlier reinforcing feedback has built that relationship.
So what we thought we'd do here is to kind of pull this all together. We would give you the ultimate consultant solution, a 2x2 matrix.
To every world problem.
Yes, we can solve it. So think about confidence, low and high, and desire for feedback, low and high. And as you think about those two things in the 2x2 here, and you think about if you have low confidence, you tend to be in the flight or the avoid mode. If confidence is high, it's kind of that fight, debate mode. So you can sort of think about that dimension. On the low, it's avoiding and flighting, and on the high, debating and fighting. On the desire for feedback, you go from flight to invite, right? So if my desire for feedback increases, I start to invite people to give me. And from avoid to discuss. Let's discuss that. So I guess the first question is, Jack, how would you approach someone who was low on confidence and their desire to receive feedback? So low.
Yeah. You know, there's an old Swedish proverb that says, with the eating comes the appetite. And I think that this is true when it comes to feedback, that people need to be led into it gently and gracefully, put them at ease, treat them with great respect, be very careful about explaining that the purpose of this discussion is to help them do an even better job. Everybody can improve no matter how good you are, that suggestions from other people are valuable, kind of laying the groundwork that this is a very common, very normal, very positive experience, and then give them some perspective by painting the big picture of their performance, not surprising them with details first, but by giving them an overall kind of appraisal of how they're functioning, how they're doing, and then ask if they are open to one or two suggestions. And I think this is a really important issue, that if the supervisor or manager will kind of engage them by saying, would you like to have an idea or two about how you can do things a little bit better? And give the person a chance to think about that and say, well, yes. And 95% of the time they will say yes. But now the control's with them. And if they respond positively, then the supervisor or manager can gently offer constructive feedback, keeping suggestions in perspective with the big picture that they have painted. And then you can be very relaxed about giving them time to decide how to implement these suggestions, or you can come back together again and help them create a plan for improvement. But you can begin this whole feedback process in a very gentle, non-threatening way. And I think you can help them create the appetite for it.
There's this funny visual that sometimes young people create for us. Competence, brash, straight. You think they could take anything. You think they're brave and bold, and it's a quibbling bunch of jelly. I'm over it. But I think sometimes I look at some of these young folks and I think they're confident because they act it.
Yeah.
But our data is suggesting they're not. They really need the reassurance. And I think if you have that in mind, it's going to be a lot better for you. So,
well, and I think that this generation probably, if there are some things that sort of distinguish them. I mean, it is, they publish videos about themselves on Facebook, and they take selfies and they publish them in the world, and they do a variety of things that you would say, gosh, that's a sign of a person with really high confidence, and yet you find out that behind that is, well, not quite so confident, not quite so.
Yeah, it's like what they're really looking for is likes.
That's right. Thumbs up. That's right.
So, low confidence, low desire for feedback. What you're going to see is fear. I'm being futility, and what they need is assurance, really clear objectives about where to go. So, what happens if you move up? If your desire to feedback increases, Jack?
Well, and for people who have a high desire for feedback, but they still lack confidence, again, the process would be the manager can provide them with validation and recognize their achievements and their past accomplishments, kind of, again, seek their perspective and on the topic about which they're seeking some feedback and wanting some further information, and then again, ask if they are open to some suggestions. If they say yes, then gently give them some honest, constructive observations and feedback. Again, get their reactions to those suggestions and help them to create a plan for improvement. So it just once again, leading them into it very gently. But now if the person really is asking for feedback on a particular topic, you've now got a much more open door to doing it with them.
I was talking to this Gen Wire in Amsterdam, and he gave me 2 examples of feedback, one that worked and one that didn't. So the one that didn't work was a senior leader who he respected a lot came to a presentation that he did. And at the end of the presentation, he said went very well, and people agreed with the direction. He came up to him and said, you need that observation, you need that conclusion at the top of every slide. There was one slide where you didn't have it. That was the feedback. And he said, it made me mad, it made me angry. I'm still ticked off about it because, I mean, there was no validation there for him. He said, now, another person gave him some feedback, but the feedback was, you're doing so well, can I give you some ideas about what you could even do better to create an outstanding strength here? And he says, I ate that up, I embraced it. Again, it's that validation. And so as you think about that model, if you have somebody who's curious and desires feedback, they're curious, but they're insecure. So validate, stamp that ticket. But they need the direction. They really they may not be doing a great job, and they need, I mean, what I asked this person, I said, well, was the feedback from this other boss that you got so upset about, was it correct? He says, oh yeah, it was correct. I just ticked off about it. It frustrated me.
Yeah, but what's frustrating about that one is that it would have been so easy for that senior manager to have couched that and said it in a different way, achieved exactly the same outcome, and have it be a positive experience rather than being negative. I mean, if it said, hey, great presentation, I saw that, nearly all your slides had a heading at the top. This organization really does like to have conclusions stated at the top. And that's all he would have had to have said. I mean, that would have been enough.
And he would have
missed the opportunity.
Missed the opportunity. So, let's say you have high confidence and high desire for feedback. Jack?
Yeah, so with that person, you engage in, again, a discussion about the successes they have. But in this case now, you can have a discussion about some of the challenges that are occurring. And you can explore the topic about which they seek feedback or that you believe is important for them to receive feedback about. And again, ask for their perspective and their point of view on that topic, which is a mark of great respect. And you're giving them a chance to sort of give you their perspective. And you may learn some really interesting things in that part of the discussion that you weren't aware of.
So even though that desire is high, those confidence is high, you're still going to have that what's your point of view? What's your perspective?
Exactly. And then to say, now would you be interested in, kind of a couple of my observations? And then you provide your perspective and your ideas, and then pause, get their reaction to that, and set a time for them to create an implementation plan, or you help them create that plan. And that really then closes the loop and deals with this person who's got high confidence, at the same time has got a high desire for feedback.
So we go from this insecurity and low confidence. Now we have high self-confidence, and we're self-reliant, and we want feedback, and this is where we can really have a great discussion and get alignment. And again, you'd think, gosh, we've arrived. We're in a great place. I'm confident. I like feedback. There's an interesting thing that happens over time. We looked at a person's desire for feedback and age.
Well, and it's their asking for feedback that we particularly were looking at, because
Right.
We said earlier that they tend to get a little more comfortable, they tend to be a little more confident, but the question is, do they ask for feedback?
And asking is, there's something that happens when you ask, isn't
Right.
there?
Absolutely.
It changes the conversation, doesn't it?
Completely.
And I think one of the great things that if we could teach people to do more is to ask for feedback, because by asking, it changes. I mean, when you get ambushed for by feedback, I mean, good luck.
That's right.
I mean, you're walking down the hall and somebody comes up. You said this the other day, and somebody says, "What? Describe that for me, Jack."
Well, you're walking down the hall and somebody sort of says, this presentation you gave this morning, it would have been better. I've got some feedback for you about that presentation that you gave. And so what's your first thought? What's your emotional reaction? And 95% of the people, if they hear the word feedback about a presentation I made this morning, they assume it's negative, and they get really kind of, defensive and brittle and
So again, asking for feedback. But if you look at this over age, as people age, their desire to ask, or their willingness and their ability to ask for feedback, goes down. And then we looked at this by position. Oh my gosh. Supervisors were at the 60th percentile in individual contributors, but we went to executives and we find out that they're the worst at it.
Yeah, and you wonder if it's because the higher you go, you think you need it less, or people are much less prone to give it to you.
And when they do give it to you, guess what they hear?
Yeah, all they hear is just pablum and,
Aren't you wonderful?
Yeah.
Gosh, I really liked what you did. So what we're thinking here is that there's something that can happen to people, and it's this false sense of security. You reach a point in your career where you're self-reliant, you're doing good, you've had great discussions, career's going well, you've been promoted, and all of a sudden I go from a desire for feedback down to pride and arrogance.
Yeah.
And that can lead to some really negative consequences and a need for redirection. And two things can happen. Either people can get enlightened and go back up, or they can melt down and really go back to that point where that pride took over. It's interesting to look. We've looked at people who were fired, and the average tenure for those folks was 17 years. They got to a point, and what we found out is the major point, or the reason they were fired, they were given the feedback, they just didn't listen. And so this is something that can happen. And so we think that this feedback is important at every point in your life. Well,
so let's kind of helping confident colleagues who don't seek feedback. One of the things that we think you as a leader can do, and we can encourage leaders in our organizations to do, is to be a good role model and to encourage all managers to regularly kind of seek feedback from their colleagues. And we've got some fascinating data that talks about what impact that has on the organization. But there's no single thing probably the manager could do that would have a more positive effect than being the role model for seeking feedback from the people with whom she or he works.
Because if you seek it, they'll see that role modeling occur.
And they can see how you respond to it, and they can see that you really are serious and that you're wanting to do something about it. So I guess it comes now back to this question about, is Gen Y behavior unique to them? And as we've sort of alluded to earlier, we don't think so. It's been true of each generation when they were young. We're more focused on it right now, but we really don't think much has changed. And leaders who ask for feedback are better leaders. And Joe, why don't you just kind of wrap up by talking about this study that we'd done quite some time ago on this topic.
And again, this is a study with 51,000 leaders, and we looked at your willingness to actively look for opportunities to get feedback and your effectiveness as a leader. And what you see is that people that were the worst at asking for feedback, their average leadership effectiveness score was at the 15th percentile. The people that were in the top 10%, their average leadership effectiveness score was at the 86th percentile. We think that this ability to continue to ask for feedback, and our point around this whole issue of feedback is two. One, feedback is so critical. It is so critical. It is the way that leaders can become more effective. It's the way that individuals can be more effective. And we reach a point where we close ourselves off to feedback. There's two issues here. One is the person themselves and their openness to receiving feedback. Yeah. But the other one that's big here is a person's ability to give it in the right way, Jack. And we've got a new workshop around that.
Be coming out in August, called Elevating Feedback. And we think it's a wonderful skill-building program that is designed to help leaders pretty much at all levels in the organization learn the skill and learn the pattern of how to give feedback more effectively.
The other thing that I learned from this study here, and that shows me the effective feedback, is the power of our 360 feedback as a way of giving people feedback in a different kind of forum. What I've seen over and over again is when people get 360 feedback, because it's metrics and because it's measured and compared to norms, oftentimes people will look at that and say, oh my gosh, I've heard this before, but now I'm going to do something about it. It really is an excellent way to really help people know where they stand. And there's two things about it. And let's talk about Gen Y first. Are they getting enough of this 360 feedback early?
And the answer is clearly no. And we've written about this, but let's say it again now. The data would say we're simply waiting too long. People are on average in their first supervisory or managerial position for about 9 years before they ever get any kind of awareness, self-awareness, any kind of an experience that gives them this kind of feedback. And we think organizations make a really serious mistake when they don't give them this information at a much earlier stage in their career. As you know, we have this organization who's been a long-time client of ours, Symantec, whom we asked, if you were doing your overall leadership development program all over again, what would you do differently? And the answer was, would start much earlier in people's careers.
The second one that's kind of interesting is oftentimes I'll talk to senior leaders about 360 and they'll say, yeah, I've had that. I've gotten my 360. And I said, well, how long has that been? Oh, it's been about 5 years. My question is, gee, in the last 5 years, has anything changed in your job, in the environment, in the competitors, in the situation in the organization, such that you might want and need feedback today? And I think that the organizations that we see that are doing the best at this have a regular program of giving people feedback every few years to help them understand where they're at today, because their direct reports have changed, their positions have oftentimes changed, and the feedback changes, and it really helps them to calculate where they are today. So we are big believers in feedback, and we think that can change the world. Well, that's where we stand. So thank you so much for joining us today. Be open to feedback, and think about that whole model as you think about that 2x2 matrix as people grow in confidence. This is really about your ability to give it in the right way, and then people will receive it. So good luck.